On the 7th of September 1940, the skies over southern England were not just cold, they were hostile. This date marked the ignition of the Blitz, a period of strategic terror where the survival of Britain hinged on priority. At 25,000 feet, a single, silent Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft, a Dornier, cut through the high atmosphere. Its Zeiss camera relentlessly clicked, recording the most critical targets of the British military machine. The pilot banked hard, aligning his lens over Cambridgeshire. His briefing notes named the target, RAF Bossingbourne. This was a critical bomber training station, a nexus of British air power, operational for just 2 years. The photos were the German intelligence lifeline. Yet when the prints reached the photo interpretation unit outside Berlin, the analysts, young and overworked, paused. They frowned deep into their stereoscopic viewers. The massive airfield, a complex of 4 H-type hangars, sprawling facilities, and acres of concrete, appeared to be doing something impossible. It looked like it was retreating. The analysts saw what appeared to be reversion to farmland. Painted lines, mimicking the ancient irregular twists of British hedgerows, snaked across the concrete runways. Patches between the tarmac surfaces displayed the unmistakable, varied texture of growing crops. The site was instantly downgraded in the target folder. The burning question, the one that cost the Luftwaffe crucial bombs and hours, was simple. Why waste high explosives on an airfield that seemed barely operational, decaying back into the countryside? This wasn't neglect. This wasn't abandoned land. This was in fact one of Britain's busiest training centers, humming with dozens of Wellington bombers and thousands of personnel. What the Luftwaffe lens was capturing from 6 miles up was the result of a calculated conceptual deception that was rapidly becoming standard military doctrine across the island. The strips of green between the concrete runways weren't the sign of a station closing down. They were the signature of a new strategic weapon. Why did military thinkers across Europe, including the meticulous Luftwaffe, believe hiding a facility spanning 600 acres was futile? They argued the concrete runways alone left geometric scars visible from 30,000 feet. The American doctrine emphasized functional, obvious facilities first, with camouflage as a cheap afterthought. The British understood something fundamentally different, a concept developed not just by soldiers, but by a select, brilliant team of artists and architects under the Civilian Camouflage Directorate. Their policy, formalized in 1938, was not designed to make an airfield invisible. It was merely designed to delay recognition. This was the genius of their arithmetic. They only needed to confuse the human eye perhaps 30 seconds. 30 seconds of doubt for a bomber crew making their final approach. 30 seconds that meant the difference between a direct, catastrophic hit and a scattered, ineffective raid. The first deception was mimicry. Painting fake hedgerows onto the grass and tarmac to break up the telltale geometric regularity. At RAF Yeadon, false hedge lines were painted diagonally across the runway itself. But paint fades, and from altitude it can look suspiciously uniform. The real strategic breakthrough wasn't paint, it was biological. When sites like RAF Bossingbourne completed their construction in the early 1940s, the Air Ministry mandated a bizarre decree. The wide strips between the massive intersecting concrete runways were to resemble agricultural crops. Not painted to look like crops, but actual agricultural production. Imagine the scene. Wheat, barley, or hay crops were prepared, seeded, and maintained as functional farmland in the gaps between aircraft flight paths. The variation itself became the enhanced deception. Why? because a Luftwaffe analyst looking at varied crop colors saw the natural irregularity of British agriculture, a quilted mosaic of pasture, plowed earth, and growth, not the suspiciously uniform green of a maintained military lawn. The logistical challenge was immense. How do you coordinate harvesting schedules with flight operations? Safety rules strictly limited grass height near runways, but in the wide, non-operational spaces, crops could grow to their natural height. The British government, simultaneously facing near starvation due to German submarine warfare, had launched the Plow-up Campaign, converting millions of acres to food production. Suddenly, these airfields solved two critical problems at once: war economy and strategic deception. Every acre of wheat between concrete runways was both food and camouflage. This worked because it weaponized human pattern recognition. The Luftwaffe interpreters were trained to spot geometric clarity, the straight lines, the circular dispersal patterns, the regimented shapes. When they looked at aerial photographs of sites like RAF South Cerney, they saw painted field boundaries that read as genuine hedgerows. More crucially, the genuine, varied crops between runways displayed exactly the tonal variation analysts expected from farmland. A field of pale gold wheat followed by dark green barley. This temporal, organic consistency, crops behaving exactly as crops should, reinforced the lie. RAF Bossingborn's camouflage didn't make it invisible, but the target folders show it was consistently misassessed and never received the sustained bombardment its strategic importance warranted. But the most dramatic success belonged to RAF Tempsford. This site was initially considered unsuitable for aviation due to frequent fog and waterlogged ground. British planners seized on this weakness, betting that German reconnaissance would reach the exact same conclusion about its unsuitability. They painted fake hedgerows and disguised massive hangars as farm buildings. The shocking secret? Tempsford became home to the 138th Special Duties Squadron, the base responsible for clandestine parachute drops supporting SOE, SIS, and resistance groups across occupied Europe. It was one of Britain's most sensitive installations, and yet it maintained the persistent, convincing appearance of marginal farmland throughout the entire war. The deception wasn't perfect. British authorities knew a ground-level inspection would expose it, but operational deception works in gradations. Consider the arithmetic. If camouflage forced the Luftwaffe to photograph RAF Bossingborn in May, and then again in June for confirmation, and a third time in July to establish its true status, that consumed critical reconnaissance resources. A Dornier flying 3 times to photograph one field meant 3 fewer missions analyzing genuine threats elsewhere. The Luftwaffe expected airfields to scream, "Bomb me." The RAF built airfields that whispered, "Ignore me." In the high-pressure environment of 1940 to 1943, where intelligence was degraded and time was scarce, an airfield that required careful study to confirm its status was bypassed in favor of the obvious. The camouflage worked not by perfection, but by introducing strategic doubt. The RAF didn't grow crops on their airfields despite military necessity. They grew them because of it. They weaponized the very landscape of Britain. The result was that for crucial months, the Luftwaffe couldn't always tell the difference between a golden field of wheat and a fully operational bomber station. And that was ultimately the point.